All right, we're going to go ahead and start. Welcome, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on leveraging new state and federal funds for educator diversity. I'm Dr. Kai Matthews, and author of the policy brief, but also research director over the California Educator Diversity Project at the Center for the Transformation of Schools. And I'm going to kick it off by giving it to someone who's way more equipped than I am at kicking off a webinar and getting us prepared for the discussion is Dr. Tyrone Howard, Faculty Director at the Center for the Transformation of Schools. Dr. Howard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matthews. It is my honor and privilege to be with you all this morning. We can't say enough about why it's important for us to have the discussion that we're going to have today, because it deals with one of the more important issues in educational equity that I think we can have. We want to thank you all for being here today because we know you all bring expertise and insight into the important topic that is educator diversity. Let us be clear. The reason why we're doing this work is because representation matters. I will say it again, representation matters. We can't say that we're concerned about issues tied to educational equity when we're not having the kind of educator workforce that is reflective of the students that they are serving. California, we are the second most diverse state in the entire nation. Approximately 80% of our students are non-white. But when we talk about achievement gaps, well, we don't talk about our teacher learning educator gaps. And while we're about 77, 80% of our students are non-white, what we also know is that only about 37% of our educators are non-white. That's a significant gap. And it's one gap that we must attend to. It's a gap we must address, and it's a gap we must take seriously. Why, one might ask? Well, because the data tells us that when students of color are able to interact with, learn from, exchange ideas with people who look like them, share their racial, cultural, linguistic backgrounds, their schooling experiences improve. We also know that when students learn, hear, and interact and are mentored by individuals who look like them, their academic outcomes improve. We can't say we're concerned about educational outcomes improving, yet not being willing to take on issues such as educator diversity seriously. So that's why this topic today is important, and that's why we're so grateful to host this webinar today. Let us be clear. Most recently, the California state approved $129 billion to be dedicated towards K-12 education. I'll say that again, $129 billion, unprecedented. So this is where we have to ask, how will the money be spent? Where will the money be spent? What are the levels of transparency that are in place? How do we ensure accountability? And how can we ensure that teacher diversity, educator diversity will be a part of that? So this conversation today is talking about and identifying those different resources and allocations that can be used as pathways to increase teacher diversity. We have to be very intent on making sure that these issues do not fall by the wayside. This is an opportunity that we don't want to miss out on. This is an opportunity we cannot let pass us by. We have to be very clear and intentional about the fact that if we're not asking questions about transparency, about accountability, it will harm our students. So what will the allocation look like? Where will districts be able to ensure that they are receiving their fair share of this support? And how do we take steps to make sure that these resources are strategically going to be put in place that can help to increase teacher diversity? We have to be very unapologetic in this focus, because if we're not, again, we may face a real regret some years from now. Let us be clear. Teachers across the state are doing a yo person's job of doing everything they can to invest in our young people, and we are grateful for that. We also recognize that teachers are in a situation where they are exhausted, they are taxed, they are overwhelmed, they feel very much frustrated by a current flow of events in our work. But at this point in time, we have to find additional supports for all teachers. But in particular, for today's conversations, I want to make sure that we make this strictly about the ways in which we can be very intentional about the way that educator diversity is a priority. Education diversity is something that we value, and that we put our resources in places that are going to help ensure that educator diversity not is just a wish list or a talking point, but becomes a reality in all schools across this state of California. And I want to be clear, we're not just talking about educator diversity in those districts where we have higher numbers of kids of color. Even in those districts that are racially homogenous, there still is a need to have educator diversity. So today's conversation is important because we will bring experts together who are able to bring us insight on how we can ensure that accountability, funding, opportunity, access, and equity are core to what we do. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here, and let's start this important conversation.
Thank you, Tyrone, for that. Always just so poignant with your words, and I appreciate you being here and getting us started on the conversation. Our agenda looks like today we have welcome from Dr. Howard. I'm going to be doing a brief overview of what this project is, and then also the policy brief that's accompanying this webinar. And then we're going to have our panelists, which I will introduce. Geeta Lakshmi Narayana, who is the director at Stanford National Board Resource Center. We'll be talking about the National Board Certification Allocation. Dr. Karen Escalante, assistant professor at CSU San Bernardino and a board member of directors for California Council of Teacher Education. She will be talking about teacher residencies. We also have Dr. Gina Porter, Superintendent at San Ysidro School District and Vice President and Legislative Policy at AXA. We'll be talking about the use of ESRE and GEAR funds. And then Carl Williams, President of the Council of Classified Employees for California Federation of Teachers, will be talking about the classified pathway allocations. And after that, we'll do a brief Q&A and have a closing. So next slide, please. This is me. I'm Kai. If we can go to the next slide, I'll talk about the project. The California Educator Diversity Project is the 2-year landscape study where we're examining the equity challenges and equity opportunities for individuals of color, particularly in California's pipeline. So this has to do with anywhere from how we recruit, how we prepare, how we hire, how we train, give continuous support to, and retain individuals, individual teachers. And so the purpose of this work is to, number one, highlight promising models and efforts that are taking place around California in terms of recruitment and preparation of individuals of color for the teacher workforce, but also to make some policy and practice recommendations for short-term and long-term efforts. So this policy brief in particular, if you can go to the next slide, this policy brief in particular highlights 11 funding opportunities at the state and federal level and provides relevant research on the effectiveness and the impact of each expenditure. So we have this money. What does the research say about the use of these funds for particularly hiring diverse candidates into the teacher workforce? And what do we know about its impact on not only teachers and schools, but students more specifically? Along with this research, there's going to be state, local, and federal recommendations that accompany each allocation. And just to reiterate what Dr. Howard was saying is that we know that diversity does not happen in a vacuum. It has to be intentional. It has to be strategic. And a lot of times there are policy and practice shifts that are required in order to make diversity a reality on our school campuses. But the financial supports are often overlooked or underutilized. And so the words that you're probably going to hear throughout this presentation and throughout this webinar is strategic. Right? Strategically using these funds for the purpose of increasing diversity at your school site. It has to be intentional. And really diversity is the floor. Reiterating again what Dr. Howard said, it's the floor. We cannot talk or begin to talk about equity. We cannot begin to talk about inclusive practices or inclusion if we don't have representation in the room. And so it takes more than just policy change. It takes more than just practice change or ideology change. There needs to be some type of financial support that is backing these initiatives in order to make it sustainable. And so this is why I'm excited to have this webinar and to be releasing this brief. Our panelists today are going to be talking about strategically how to use these funds and allocate these funds for the purpose of diversity and your larger equity efforts. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Geeta, who will be talking about National Board Certification.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be with you all today. My name is Geeta Lakshmi Narayana, and I'm the director of the National Board Resource Center at Stanford. We're an organization that supports national board certification candidates, facilitators, doing advocacy work for the national board process. You may not know much about national board certification. It is a voluntary certification, a nationwide one for K-12 teachers, and it's often recognized as the gold standard of teacher certification beyond your initial California credential. And so some people ask, why would a teacher want to do this voluntary certification, this thing that is not required, and how does it actually support teachers, especially teachers of color? Like Dr. Matthews mentioned, if systems are left as they are, they will replicate old systems. And so national board certification is something that often teachers of color are interested in, but don't necessarily know how to pursue. I would say that the current national board certified teacher community is more heavily white and is more heavily teachers who teach in higher need school or lower need schools, higher income schools. And I think, and luckily with this new legislation that I'll talk a little bit about, there's a lot of opportunity to diversify who gets to be seen as an accomplished teacher. So on the next slide, I've got a couple of bullet points about why is national board certification particularly important for supporting and retaining teachers of color in particular. Dr. Howard mentioned earlier the burnout that we're seeing right now among all of our teachers, what a difficult time this is. And going through the certification process can often really reinvigorate a teacher's passion. Teachers who go through national board certification are teachers who have been in the field for a while. You have to have been teaching for at least 3 years. And often we find that teachers at that point are getting burned out. Teachers who are great teachers have been tapped for so much leadership that they're exhausted. And certification can be a way to refocus on your classroom and really reignite that passion for students. The certification process is also really personalized for a teacher's teaching context. Most of the certification is portfolio based, where teachers collect artifacts from their classrooms and write and reflect on their students, their teaching practice. So it's something that's not, a lot of professional development can feel exhausting for teachers when, okay, everybody go learn about literacy, which is important, but maybe not the thing you're focusing on in your own classroom. So there's a lot of personalization to certification that is not always present in other professional development opportunities. I think for teachers of color in particular, having this official validation of your teacher quality can be really important, as teachers of color are often overlooked for their talents and their gifts that they're bringing to their students and to the school community. So being recognized as a national board certified teacher can give that additional boost that's really important, and also help national board certified teachers get tapped for leadership roles in schools and districts. Diversifying our teacher workforce isn't just about who's in the classroom, it's also about who's making leadership decisions. And then finally, on a really practical level, many districts offer salary stipends. The state of California is going to be offering salary stipends for national board certified teachers. And this can be a way for teachers to stay in schools and in roles that they're really passionate about and where they're most effective, instead of leaving their school or their profession for higher paying opportunities. All right, next I'll talk a little bit about some of the funding opportunities that are available for around national board. California just passed legislation around this National Board Certification Incentive Program. And it's really exciting because for any teacher in a high priority school who is National Board certified, they can earn an additional $5,000 stipend per year for up to 5 years. And anyone who's interested in going through the certification costs can get that paid for by the state of California. So this is a really big deal because the certification is an expensive process, and not all school districts offer additional stipends for it. So this is a way to increase the number of national board certified teachers and to retain those teachers in those high priority schools. Also, it may be important to know that the ESSER and American Rescue Plan funding can be used for national board certification activities. So if you're in a school or district where you're not you don't have high priority schools, you can still use that federal funding to defray costs of certification, to provide support for teachers who are going through the certification process, to offer different stipends, or to provide professional learning for all of your teachers based in national board standards. When we share the slide deck, there's some additional links that are there that offer more details about ways you can use that federal funding. as you're thinking about how you might use this funding in your own school or district, I wanted to raise some specific barriers around teachers being able to certify. One is a lack of awareness. A lot of teachers just don't know that this is an option, or don't know the benefits of going through the certification process. So I think it can be really important for schools and districts to advertise National Board Certification as a professional learning opportunity and as a financial opportunity for teachers. I've heard from a lot of teachers, especially teachers of color, of this imposter syndrome of, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm a good enough teacher. The certification process sounds difficult. And it is a difficult process. There's no question about that. But I think there's a lot of people who don't even try because they're nervous or scared that they're not seen in that world. So making more personal connections can make a big difference when you're trying to tap potential candidates. And also it can be really important to connect teachers who are interested in certification with current National Board certified teachers who are in the area. So they see themselves, especially other teachers of color, in this process. I mentioned earlier that certification can be pretty expensive. The certification itself is almost $2,000. And so if that's a lot for an individual to pay out of pocket. So helping candidates understand what the costs are and what the incentives are of certification, both for covering initial costs and for stipends they might earn afterwards, that can make a big difference in getting them into the process. And then also the information can be really complicated. The ways that this funding is getting rolled out, there will be an application process for candidates and NBCTs. So to make sure that people actually are aware of that you're sending them links to the application, little check-ins of, hey, did you get all this filled out, can make a big difference. And then the last thing I'd add is with the certification process, it's really important that candidates have access to support programs and to other folks who are going through this process together. That can be something formal. The Stanford National Board Resource Center offers online support programs that are open to anyone. But additionally, even just convening a group of 5 teachers who are working on this process together in the same school or district can create that community and that accountability that will help candidates be more successful and learn more through the process. I think connecting candidates with others who understand their needs can make a big difference. Right now, the National Board Resource Center and California Teachers Association are co-sponsoring a certification group just for teachers of color. And we found that to be a really rich and nourishing place for those candidates. Other people, it's really important for them to get content area support. So the more you can connect more people and more networks, the more successful teachers will be. And then also, I'll just add something that we found that makes a big difference in helping candidates be successful is being sensitive to their personal challenges. People have families, people are going through difficult situations with COVID and with the rest of the world. And so making sure that people know that you love them, whether they decide to certify or not, or talking through with them. I've end up in a lot of conversations where I say, no, you're not, it doesn't mean you're a bad teacher if you're struggling with this. And just sort of being sensitive to different people's needs. I think there was a question in the chat, but I'll hold off on that for a second. One last slide is you probably have hopefully you have teachers in your school or district who are already National Board certified. And it's just as important to get people into the certification process as it is to retain and leverage those accomplished teachers who are already in your schools. In the links in these slides, there's a directory to find National Board certified teachers in your area. So you can search by your district or your area. And those are great people to ask for to put into leadership roles, to ask for input about what they think, because they are accomplished teachers. Also, again, I mentioned communicating important updates about the California stipend and making sure people know how to access that if you are in a high priority school. One thing to know about certification is that teachers have to go through a maintenance of certification process every 5 years. So there will be people all the teachers who are getting this stipend will actually need to maintain their certification. That's not covered by this funding, so that's something that the school can cover. It's a much less expensive process. I believe it's $500 to go through that maintenance of certification. And then also national board certified teachers tend to love giving back to the community and mentoring others. So the more that you can access those local national board certified teachers to mentor and support current candidates, especially your national board certified teachers of color, the more that it will continue to build this community. All right, I know that was a lot of information, and I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Karen Escalante to throw more information at you.
Thank you, Geetha. I appreciate that. Welcome, friends. Happy Wednesday, as I think you've heard already today. So I'm going to be taking an opportunity to talk to you about the California Teacher Residency Grants. As you've heard, there's a lot of money in the state right now, and we do want to focus on recruiting candidates of color into this profession. So there's been $350 million allocated to expand, strengthen, improve access to, or create teacher residency programs. So the funding is available to either establish a new residency program, and we have areas of need in regards to content areas. TK and kindergarten are areas of need. However, there's also efforts to recruit diverse teaching force that reflects an LEA's community's diversity. And that's the piece that I really want to focus on today, and in regards to the funding that's available. So a teacher residency pathway, an alternative pathway to earning a credential program. It really is the gold standard in regards to earning a credential program. And it's modeled after what we consider the medical residency program, where a candidate is with an expert teacher, a residency teacher, for a full school year, working in the classroom with students. They're with a teacher mentor and a supervisor, receiving regular feedback. The residency program allows for the candidate to complete a university-based teacher preparation program, and they would be part of a cohort specifically for the residency program. Through this grant, candidates are paid up to $25,000 for their year in the program, and then they would commit to teaching at that school site for up to an additional 4 years. I want to point out that CSU Bakersfield does have a very successful teacher residency program. 2 of their faculty members granted me some time and expertise in regards to what's working for them. So a particular thank you to Debbie Meadows and Holly Gonzalez for sitting down and talking with me. One of the things that they mentioned to me is that in order to have a successful relationship in terms of a teacher residency program, is you need an authentic relationship with the university credential program and a school district. This is really significant. You can't just come together with a random IHE and LEA and decide to create a partnership, but it really needs to be purposeful and authentic. And universities will want to consider which districts need this residency partnership. So consider the needs of districts in order to collaborate in part of creating that diverse need within a local community. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the pieces that you want to be aware of is that you'll be working closely with an LEA. The IHEs and LEAs will be working closely. So you do want to make sure that there is compatibility and a deep understanding of how each organization works. You'll want to create teams from the LEA and IHE, equal number of teams, to allow some group conversations and allow the organization to run smoothly. You want to make sure the right people are in the job. And of course, we'll talk about what that looks like in terms of recruiting diverse candidates. You want to select a coordinator from the credential program who can oversee the residency program, and ensure that credential programs are prepared to teach the residency candidates to address their unique needs and assets. You want to limit the credential cohort to about 20 candidates. And finally, you want to discuss, once these 5 years are up, because that's the length of the grant, how can you continue in this partnership? So How do we use these funds to effectively support diversity? Again, this relies on a strong collaborative partnership between the IHE and the LEA to guide the work of the residency program that includes representatives of color. And in this partnership, develop a clear vision for prioritizing, develop a diverse teacher workforce and developing teachers who are well prepared to serve students of color. We know there's this disconnect. Dr. Howard talked about this in the very beginning, the number of teachers of color, which is minimal, versus our PK through 12 students of color, which is significant. There's a significant disconnect. We want to make sure that clinical practice components of the residency prioritizes district partnerships where the mentor teachers and supervisors of residents are themselves teachers of color. Incentivize expert teachers of color to serve as mentor teachers, consider compensation and release time. Provide professional development funds to support mentor teachers in providing relevant and meaningful support to residents. And because $25,000 for our to support our diverse candidates into this profession is not enough to live off of. It's not enough. And so we need to leverage additional funding sources, braiding different funding sources to provide additional funds. You also want to consider different recruiting pipelines within local communities, including paraprofessionals, after school staff, as well as undergraduate programs. The piece to be really clear of in regards to the California Teacher Residency Grant is it's a very small window to apply. So applications went out in early November. If you are interested, you need to let the district, or excuse me, you need to let CTC know at this email address by December 13th. So let them know by December 13th. And then your application is due by February 14th by 5 p.m. Late applications will not be accepted. Again, this project timeline is up to 5 years that the grant is being provided. So you, the LEA and the IHE, really want to sit down and determine, are we a good partnership? How can we support diverse candidates in this profession? And how can we make this work for the long haul? Not just this 5 years, how can we make this work for the long haul? So friends, that's what I wanted to share with you all today. There are ways that we can use this grant, braid it with other funds to ensure that we can use this money to attract diverse candidates and support them in the profession. I'm now going to pass the next presentation on to Dr. Gina Potter, Superintendent of San Ysidro School District and Vice President, Legislative Action for ACSA. So Dr. Potter.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Escalante. I appreciate the information that you shared. I find it very powerful in the work that we're focused on at this time. A very special thank you to both Dr. Howard and also to Dr. Matthews from the UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools for their keen and explicit focus on their work of diversity and equity in education. This work is something that takes a long time to achieve. And I have to say, having earned my master's in education and teaching credential from UCLA many years ago, that I'm proud to say I'm a UCLA Bruin, because UCLA has been focusing on the work of diversity and equity for many decades now. And it's critical work in the field of education. I have the opportunity today to share with you the COVID relief funding sources that have been received by public school districts in the state of California, both from the federal and from the state governments. They are one-time funds, and looking at those funding sources and determining how can we use these funds towards the efforts of diversity in education. Next slide. The first funding source I'd like to share with you is The Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds, we call these funds in school districts ESSER funds. We have received 3 rounds of ESSER funds for COVID relief from the federal government. These funding sources have been critical for all districts in the United States in making sure that we had the opportunity to safely reopen our schools for in-person instruction 5 days a week amidst the COVID pandemic. The allowable expenditures for these ESSER funds are strategies for continuous safe in-person learning. They are focused on addressing the impact of lost instructional time when we closed our schools and pivoted to distance learning, which was internet-based for the vast majority of students across the United States. And then at the end of last school year, we transitioned to hybrid learning, where a couple days a week, the students came to school in person, and other days each week, the students continued their online learning. The funds were also focused on supporting students' academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs. And finally, to ensure interventions are available to students to address the needs during the pandemic. In California, for our state, the ESSER 1 funds, the allocation to California was $1.6 billion, and the expiration date for these funds is 2022. The ESSER 2 funds, the allocation for California was $6.7 billion, also with an expiration date to use the funds by 2022. And the ESSER 3 funds were $13.57 billion, with an expiration date to use these funds by 2024. So you could see that we have a couple years to really strategically determine how, as school districts, we would identify which areas we would focus these funds towards. Next slide. The second funding source that I'd like to bring to your attention is the California Educator Effectiveness Grant, EEG. This grant, public school districts are able to apply for, and the allowable expenditures are very interesting because the first and most prominent identified expenditure is towards teacher and administrator induction, mentoring, and retention, which may address local need for teachers that can serve all pupil populations. So there you could see that there's an explicit tie to diversity and to equity. There's also a focus on standards-aligned instruction and improved literacy, the re-engagement of pupils in accelerated learning, social emotional learning and trauma-informed practices, school climate that values diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds, inclusive practices, effective language acquisition programs for English language learners, professional learning networks, ethnic studies curriculum for grades 7 to 12, and early childhood education. The California allocation for this grant is $1.5 billion with an expiration date of 2026. And I'm very proud to share that our district, San Ysidro School District, which is located just north of the Mexican border for the San Ysidro Port of Entry into the United States, is one of the award winners for this grant. This is critical for my school district because in my school district, like many districts in the state of California, the predominant language spoken by more than 60% of my students is Spanish. And that's important that we look at how can we meet the needs through our workforce for the students that we serve. The third and next slide, category of funding that I'd like to bring to your attention to consider using in your school district is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief, or GEAR funds. These funds are also COVID-related one-time relief funds. The California allocation of these funds is $355 million with an expiration date of September 2022. The allowable expenditures for these funds are to address learning loss or accelerate progress, to extend an instructional school year. Typically, the instructional school year in a public school district is 180 calendar days in accordance with the California Education Code. This allows you to extend that 180 days to more instructional days or even to a longer instructional day at the end with extended programs both before and after school. It allows you to provide additional academic services, intensive instruction, technology, instructional materials, to integrate pupil support systems such as health, counseling, mental health, distance learning, meals, and we'll talk about meals on the next slide, social emotional learning, and health and safety concerns. This final slide that I have to share with you is really focused on how do we use these three funding sources as a school district, both as the district and as schools, to really look at issues of diversity and equity. And here's some ideas your district and your school may want to consider, or if you're entering the profession of education as a teacher or an administrator, these are some ideas for you to consider. One is, while we're opening our schools for continuous, safe, in-person learning during this COVID pandemic, how could we use these funds to provide professional development focused on diversity and equity? And how can we rethink our staff hiring protocols and practices? Is it possible that maybe when we hire, we might have a student population that has a need for teachers or administrators or staff members that have a talent in multilingualism, where they speak more than one language? Are we looking for bilingual preferred? Are we looking for teachers that may have a B-class certification, or that were GLAD trained or have strengths in the ELD focus area of instructional practices? While we're increasing our staffing, those same things are things that we could be looking for the student populations that we serve. Our independent study programs are there to offer virtual learning academies and to also offer continuous instruction during COVID quarantine periods, so that we can make sure that all students in the state of California have equitable access to education and that they don't lose a day of learning. We can offer academic tutoring to students, and this is critical. You'll find that in high affluent areas, academic tutoring that's something that affluent families can afford on their own. However, in other areas where the demographics are such that families need support with the payment of academic tutoring, these funds can allow for school districts to pay for that tutoring for the students that we serve. That multi-tiered system of support and interventions, when you're looking at that multi-tiered system of support, this is when you can infuse culturally responsive learning practices, when you can infuse restorative practices as referenced in the policy brief. And then same with equitable access to technology. I have to tell you, the minute that COVID pandemic hit in my district in March of 2020, I sent out a survey to all of my families. 85% of my students did not have access to either the internet or to a Chromebook or laptop to be able to access online learning. This is an extreme issue of crisis in our state of California, that when the pandemic hit, so many of our students, of the 6 million students that we represent in the K-12 area, weren't able to even go online to learn because they might not have had internet. They might not have had a device to open that internet. That's an issue of diversity and equity in education that really we need to meaningfully address in K-12 education, not just during the COVID pandemic, but beyond. What happens when these one-time relief funds expire? How do these same children have the ability to access technology beyond? Same thing with meal service. Many of our students did not have access to food when the schools closed, and we were able, thanks to the federal government and these funds, to continue to provide meal service. Again, those are issues of equity and equality. And finally, mental health support services and social emotional curriculum. These are critical issues that all students need to have equitable access to. I thank you for your time, Dr. Matthews and Dr. Howard. Thank you so much to the UCLA Center for this transformation of schools, and to AXA also for always putting equity first in the field of education. Oh, now it's my absolute honor to introduce to you Carl Williams. He is the president for the Council of Classified Employees, which is a subdivision of the California Federation of Teachers. Mr. Williams.
Oh, Carl, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, that is the tagline for this year, right? We're on mute. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carl Williams. I am the Good morning. My name is Carl Williams. I am the president of the Council of Classified Employees for the CFT, the Union of Educators and Classified Professionals. And I am also the president of the Lawndale Federation of Classified Employees, where I am a senior custodian, and it is my honor to serve with such an esteemed panel. And today I will be discussing the classified pathway to teacher credentialing. And I want to start off by sharing exactly what a classified professional is. Classified professionals, as we call them, are the essential workers that keep the schools up and running. And we cover many classifications that include transportation, clerical, custodial, food service. And we're truly those who keep the schools running every day. And safety, the paraeducators, all those who are truly the ones that keep the schools running. And those working conditions are those who were the first to arrive, were the last to leave, and many are paid slightly higher than minimum wage, and historically have been marginalized out of benefits, and slightly, some of them don't even make enough to get health care. And although we do get retirement, very few of us make $3,000 a month in our retirement benefits, but we are diverse. One thing about the classified service, we are diverse. We come out of many walks of life, all ethnicities and various educational levels. So the great thing about the classified service is that we are diverse. And why do we have a classified employee teacher credentialing program? Because we have a massive teacher shortage in California. In 2016, the CFT sponsored a bill to help bridge that gap. In 2016-17, there was a survey that 80% of the district that reported shortages said the shortages have grown worse compared with 3 years ago. And COVID-19 had likely increased that problem, with higher than average retirement and reluctance with aspiring teachers to enter the workforce. California isn't the only state to face serious teacher shortages, but it has been one of the hardest hit. Here are some key statistics that were released by the Learning Policy Institute toward the end of 2019. 34% of new hires in California had substandard credentials. 14% of hires were age 60 or older, while 40% of hires were age 50 or older. Over 6.2 million students were enrolled. Over 4,000 teachers were needed to reduce the teacher to student ratio, and 9% of teachers left public teaching in California. And 11% of teachers left public school teaching in their district or county. However, there is also a shortage in classified workers as well. Also highlighted by COVID, there has been a strain on education, food service, and custodial staff to ensure that we need to receive the services that are essential to the services to our students. And what does this program do? The legislature approved that a combined $45 million for 2 separate funding rounds that the California Classified School Employee Teaching Credentialing Program, $20 million in 2016, and an additional $25 million in 2017. This grant provides up to $4,000 per participant per year for 5 years. To be eligible, you have to complete an AA are a BA and hold a position in the district which hosts the program. You have to earn a credential and commit to teaching in that district for a year, for each year that the financial assistance is received. In July of 2021, the state appropriated $125 million to expand the California Classified School Employees Teacher Credentialing Program for another 5 years. And more statistics. In the 2019-20 year, 845 employees were enrolled in the program, and 80% of those had BA degrees. And 20% of those, 167 individuals are now teaching. However, there were some pitfalls. The amount of the grant generally is not enough to cover the tuition needs. Higher education takes more than just tuition costs, and there are other factors that are big hardships for the working class base of classified employees. There are books, there's childcare, transportation, and enough free time to study. Even in public institutions, the tuition could be 3 times the grant amount. Individuals who don't yet have their BA must fulfill that obligation, which is also cost prohibitive if they're dependent only on their classified salary. Some individuals are required to complete their student teaching regimen that is unpaid, also presenting a financial burden. And also there's their credentialing exam that is an added cost. I'm sorry. Workers are also supposed to work in their districts in their grant slot, but you can't predict the future. And we don't know if those districts will actually have a slot to hire that person. That district may be in financial need or facing layoffs. The program is likely to help some folks who are on the cusp of being a teacher, but we don't know for sure. You know, this program is just a drop in the bucket to help close the gap in the teacher shortage. But one thing is for sure, that the classified service is diverse. And to ensure that we can fulfill the need of teachers of color, we can increase funding to this program and help. We can increase teachers of color by increasing funding to this program, because there are a lot of classified employees who want to become teachers through this program. Classified employees should also be recognized for their essential contributions to public education, because they too need a living wage. And we need more classified employees to keep our students safe, because they too are essential to student success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you to all of those of our panelists. I do want to emphasize, like, the allocation that I'm the most excited about is definitely the classified pathway. As Carl said and emphasized, because it is so important, our classified school employees literally make up the most diverse segment of professional members on a school community, hands down. And so our paraprofessionals, our support staff, our service classified staff, they're already working within our schools. They tend to already have ties to our community, have students or kids or family members that are live and work at the school. Their retention levels are really high. And so this group of individuals that have already shown dedication to the school and to their students are the perfect pool to pull from in terms of finding and addressing our massive teacher shortages that are happening around California. And so I appreciate, Carl, for you talking and speaking from that lens, is that this is a population that is woefully overlooked. And this is just a drop in the bucket. As he said, this $4,000 stipend is to help to prepare these individuals, but it doesn't cover nearly enough And so we can help make up that in terms of being intentional again with our funding and then our support efforts around credentialing these individuals. So thank you, Carl, and thank you everyone on the panel. We're gonna open it up for in our last 8 minutes for some questions. I saw some of the questions in the chat that I would prefer to do online, answer online instead of in the bucket or in the chat. So I see there was a lot of questions about particularly engaging and recruiting Black men into the workforce or into the teacher workforce, particularly thinking about the funding limitations that are available, and also just the viability of that type of a teaching career over the lifespan, and what is the cost benefit analysis for an individual of color. I have some ideas, but I see Tyrone, you're also shaking your head. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I could talk for the next hour on this topic. This is one that's near and dear to my heart because, the data has shown that for Black males in particular who have just one Black male teacher, it significantly improves their educational outcome, increases their likelihood of graduating from high school, increases the likelihood that they'll graduate from college. So it's huge. But I think what we've got to think about is how can we be very intentional on earmarking funds that would really be in areas where we see larger numbers of Black men. So what might that look like? Just communicating with Summer McBride, who's on right now, about how do we start tapping into our young men who are on college campuses and our athletic programs, right? Many of them who come here who have benefited from coaching, from teachers, yet don't go professional. How do we start to think about pipelines within our athletic departments on college campuses? Because that is a huge untapped area that can be really looked at, where you have larger numbers of Black men who are already in the education pipeline and where they see the value of teaching and coaching. So we have to be more intentional about how and where our funding is spent. And being very specific in terms of targeting those communities where we're seeing larger numbers of those individuals who are not in our classrooms and schools.
Yeah, there's a significant portion of our teacher population that didn't decide to become a teacher until someone approached them.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Mm-hmm.
know that in California, you have to have your bachelor's already in order to even go into a teaching program. And so we're pulling people from science, from engineering, from literature, right? Like all of these different areas. And so we need to be intentional about where do we see high concentrations of individuals of color, individuals from diverse backgrounds that might not even know what the promise or potential of a teaching career could bring. And so that is being strategic around our recruitment practices, but also beyond just how do we even retain the individuals that we have?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of that is looking at what is happening at the K-12 level in terms of support, in terms of promising promotion pathways, also just cultural fit. Right. And so making sure I'm not just an island representing the entire community by myself. I need to have a community. I need to have allies. I need to work with people, my colleagues and my administration that also understand the importance of culturally responsive learning, anti-racist practices, being part of the community and locally responsive, and also social justice issues have to be at the forefront. And so some of this, yes, it's recruitment, but the entire profession can do a better job in making sure that we are allowing spaces for diversity to exist. It's not just bringing people from different backgrounds into education. It's making sure that we as educators and building educational spaces make sure that those spaces expand to be inclusive and to be diverse themselves, not just because of the addition of added people, but because our practices, our mindsets, our pedagogical leanings, all of that is tied to a more inclusive space for diverse individuals. And so it's hard. It's not a one thing, it's not a one pronged solution. There are multiple things that need to be done, from more targeted recruitment to generating more safe spaces and professional development that's more aligned with culturally responsive teaching practices. But It's an effort. It's an effort, and all hands on deck in terms of diversifying this pipeline.
Yeah, Kai, I wanted to see if we could jump in. I know our time is fleeting, but there's a couple of really good questions in the chat, and I don't know if we want to try to get at, if anyone on the panel wants to respond to pathways that have been explored for bilingual classified or parents. Anybody can speak to that?
So what's the question? Is it pathways for bilingual parents?
For bilingual classified teachers or bilingual parents, pathways that we might consider there. I think this is where the work that Carl talks about is important, and the point that you raised, Kai, about how we see in lots of our schools and communities, the individuals who are on classified pathways. Not only is it a pathway to getting in classified positions, but we also see some programs that target paraprofessionals to pursue the teaching profession itself, because again, they're part of the communities, they have the cultural connections, they're oftentimes they're familiar with many of the parents. So I think we have to think about this on a twofold approach. Getting those folks into classified pathways, but then not stopping there, how do we get some of those classified folks to think about pursuing teaching credentials as well?
Right. And I remember talking with Dr. Potter yesterday about strategically when you're putting out those job calls to fill positions, that you are asking for BCLAD classification. Those are language and vocabulary additions that can specify and diversify the candidate pool that you have in terms of who's applying. And I see my good friend Steve Batista also online and talk. I cannot leave without talking about the community colleges, and there's really nothing I can say, because I mean, this is something that we go back and forth on, that they are woefully underserved and overlooked. And as he mentions in the comments, like over 50% of our teaching staff comes from the community college first that are taught at CSU level. And there are no specific allocations that are being given to the state directly towards community colleges and for their efforts and with the work that they're doing to sustain our workforce. And so this is a bigger conversation than what we can even have today, but I think that that's something that needs to be investigated into, is how can we include our community colleges partners, because we know that a lot of our students are going there first. So what is the connection and meaningful relationships that can be built, not just between institutions of higher four-year institutions and our 2-year partners, but also the high schools and our community colleges. And so what pathways can be done at the local level to ensure that maybe we're pulling students who are interested in becoming teachers from those schools, and how are we financially supporting them? It's a bigger question than we can answer today, but I do want to put that out there for consideration. And if you have partners, or if you have local community colleges that a lot of your students go to, is to be reaching out specifically to them to see where can some alignment be, where can we be some meaningful partnership take place, because I think that is a pathway that can be uplifted a little bit more. I will say that we are going to be, to wrap this up, we are going to be releasing the video as well as the policy brief following this webinar. And there was a question about, is there a place where we can find all of the allocations that have who can apply, where do we apply, all the deadlines and the links? And yes, we will have that. That's coming out actually before winter break. Okay, that is the plan, is before winter break, we will have a funding guide that highlights this for LEAs who are curious and wanting to know more. And then I do want to not leave without thanking our funders for this project, the Hewlett Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which makes this work possible. And to everyone who came out on a busy Wednesday, I appreciate you, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day and a great rest.
And thank you, Dr. Matthews, for your leadership in this area. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.